On this episode of Between Two Beers, we talk to Paul Ifill. Ifill is a football legend in New Zealand. He signed for the Wellington Phoenix in 2009 and quickly established himself as the best player in their history. But before he moved to New Zealand, he'd already compiled a lifetime's worth of stories from his journey across 10 years at Millwall, Sheffield United and Crystal Palace. In this episode, we dig into that journey, like the time he tore his groin celebrating Tim Cahill's winner in the 2004 FA Cup semi-final, playing against Ronaldo, Giggs, Scholes, Keane and Van Nistelrooy in the final, the time he was dropped due to one of Neil Warnock's wife's dreams, his experiences with Keith Gillespie, who gambled away £7 million across his career, why he's a part owner of a petrol station in Sierra Leone, and why he posted a scathing column I wrote about him on his fridge in 2015. This was one of my favourite episodes we've done. Paul has lived an incredible life, but is also an expert storyteller. He's also a top bloke, and his experience, wisdom, compassion, and thirst for learning shines through in every answer. I know you'll enjoy this one. If you like what we're doing at Between Two Beers, check out our website at betweentwobeers.com and consider supporting the cause on our Patreon for the cost of a cup of coffee a month. Also, if you enjoy the app, any support or sharing on social media is much appreciated, as well as subscribing to the show in your podcast app. Thanks for tuning in. Paul Ifill, welcome to Between Two Beers.
Thanks for having me.
Delighted to have you on board. You're beaming in from Masterton, have I got that right?
That's correct, yeah. That's correct.
Yeah, straight from, you have training tonight. What was your Wednesday night looking like?
No, we're in the holidays, so I've got my academy here that train on a Monday, Wednesday, but not during the holidays, which is quite nice. So, and Wairarapa, who I play for and coach with the women, they train on a Tuesday, Thursday. So Wednesdays are pretty quiet for me.
Very nice. Well, nice bit of time to prep for a big episode of Between Two Beers. Got a lot of ground to cover. Excited to get started. Shay, how do you know Paul Ifill?
First time meeting virtually. Hope to meet in person one day. My closest connection with Paul is probably via Callan Elliott, who was one of his kids to come through the academy, played for the Wellington Phoenix and is now in Greece. So never met in person, but delighted to have him on the podcast. Really happy to hear that he's listened to a few episodes before, the illustrious Declan Edge, and I think he tweeted about our Tim Wigmore episode as well. So so that's a good one. And you, Steve, have you met Paul in person or only ever written about him in the newspaper?
No, this is the first time speaking with Paul. He's someone I put in a category of Jonathan Gould as someone who I knew they were a legend, and I knew how much. I sort of had an overview of what they'd done, but it wasn't really until the last 48 hours where I've really gone digging through his Millwall back catalogue and listening to a few other podcasts and bits and pieces that you really get a picture for what he achieved. So I'm excited to get stuck into that. I had been going back and forth about whether I was going to front foot this, and I feel like the best way is just to come clean. There was a column I used to write called the ASB Premiership Fun Bag, and
this is really good.
In 2015, I declared Paul the worst signing of the National League season. And I don't think Paul took it very well. Maybe he did, I don't know. It's hard to even think back if it was fair or not, but I figure the best way is to just get it out there. But I'd like to cushion that by saying, in my opinion, after the research I've just done, you are the best footballer we've had on the podcast.
Of course you'd say that.
And Neil Emblem might have something to say about that, but hopefully that cushions, and thanks for fronting up even after I slagged you off 6 years ago. Do you remember that?
Well, it's yes. I just said to my wife. She said, what are you doing? Because they went out to the cinema. My missus and kids went out to the cinema tonight. I said, I'm doing a podcast tonight. She said, oh, who with? Because I've done a few lately with COVID, obviously. And I went, oh, actually, do you remember the guy that had a go at me and I cut it out and put it on the fridge for a little bit of motivation? It's that guy. And she went, are you gonna let him know? I said, oh, I'll see if he fronts up. If he mentions it, I'll see how it goes, and I might mention it. But it's funny because I watched the podcast with Declan, and obviously Declan's not one to hold back on anything. And when something sort of came up with him and yourself, I thought, oh, this is going to be a bit interesting. And I thought you handled it really well. And I thought, oh, look, you know, everybody says they're bit at the time, but if you're brave enough to front it up, I can deal with that. And I remember at the time I was pissed off because I'd been out 18 months with an Achilles injury, and I'd come back and I was miles off the pace. And to be fair, partly you were right. I was pretty poor. I don't think I was the poorest in the league, but I was pretty poor. And I remember thinking, right, I'm playing another year or two here because there's no way I'm going out like that. There's a worse signing. And thankfully, I went and scored, I think, 20 and 32 for Tasman over the next couple of years. So I managed to take it down off the fridge and leave it be.
Yeah, the longevity of your career is actually a place that I want to start. So you played in the Masters football tournament earlier this year, right? February or March?
Yeah.
With a mutual friend of ours who has given us a scouting report of Paul Ifill. And I want to read what he said. So he writes, Paul Ifill, 5 goals in 3 games, still has it. Certainly with the old guys, you couldn't get the ball off him. He gets it, draws a defender in, can go both ways, both-footed. But he still does it at Central League. We played him for Petone the other week, and he ran the game even at Central League level with the young boys, because you get close to him, and he's still got that burst of speed to get past you. But he can go both ways because he's so two-footed, and he can spray the ball. He's got the knowledge. His body is falling apart a bit, but he's still pretty exceptional. So a pretty glowing review, really. But I guess my question is, and we're going to get into what you've done. I mean, you've played in the Premier League. How do you contrast playing in the best league in the world to sort of just run rings around old boys at the Masters? Does it just feel like you're on God mode, or do you still get a real kick out of it?
Yeah, I wouldn't do it if I didn't get a kick out of it. That's why I think it's more for at this stage of my career, it's more for my mental health than anything else. I mean, I don't know what it's going to be like when I can't run around. All the coaches that I talk to, all my friends are just in coaching and have given up football pretty much, and they all say to me the same thing: just keep going, because most of them look back and think I could have played for a couple more years, dropped down the leagues, and they've all said if you're still making an impact at a level that you find competitive, then keep going. And I certainly am. I think it's helped that I've got a lot of boys coming through my academy, and I feel that I can still help them. Not just by coaching, but I think there's things that I can still do on the pitch that potentially others can't. There's plenty I can't do on the pitch now, given my age, but there's things I can still do that they can learn from. And sometimes, it's great to be able to coach that, but sometimes it's quite important for them to be able to see that as well, to see that you can still be professional, even if you're not in a professional environment.
Yeah, it's incredible that you're still going into that level. And what do you do? What's your routine looking like to take care of the body? A lot of stretching? Is it working on yourself every day?
Stephen's trying to take tips here.
This is a funny thing because this goes against everything that I try and preach to the boys. So I'll probably have to be careful here. But I've never been one to stretch. It sounds terrible, still playing at 41. I barely stretch. My warm-ups are legendary for being so poor. I have a lot of injuries. I've had a lot of injuries, hamstring problems, and anything I've done never seems to get to the bottom of it. So I think I play now, and I just pick my times to go. And I think Jeremy alluded to it. I've still got a little bit of a turn of pace, but I probably only go full whack once or twice in a game now, and I just pick my times. And if I think to myself, I probably could make that, I'll leave it. And if it's a guarantee, I'll go. And if it's not, I'll leave it, because over the last couple of years, the times where I've tried to go too much, they're the games that I end up, pulling a hammy or doing something. So it's just sort of taking a little bit off the top. My main thing for keeping me going, I've got a spin bike. I've had that spin bike for about 11 years. I literally go on that every day, whether that's watching a bit of Netflix, catching up on a podcast. I stick that on, get on the spin bike, do an hour, and then I feel like I've loosened myself up for the day, and I've got my 2 training sessions a week. And I'm pretty active with the coaching as well. I like to get, in and amongst it. And I'm always walking around or running around or, shouting and carrying on. So I think I'm pretty active still. And that keeps me going. So I have a friend back in the UK called Jamie Curitan, who's still playing. He played at the same sort of time as me, a little bit older than me. He's coming up 45 and he's still playing at a level that I would say is probably higher than what I'm playing at. So I look in to see how he's going. He keeps scoring goals, and I'm like, well, if he's still going, I'm going to go for a couple more years yet.
Well, we've got a legendary goalkeeper now. Granted, goalkeeping is a different position, but Neil Moucher, who's at Millwall, was on the bench in our Chatham Cup final at age 50. Stephen, I think he was 50. He still does a job in the pipes. Can we expect to see Paul Ifill for Wairarapa United at age 50?
If I'm still playing at 50, then I'm not doing my job well enough, because there's got to be some boys coming through pushing me out soon. Like if we get a couple of goal scorers through, I think then the gaffer down here will put me out to pasture to get it out and about for the reserves, which is fine. I've got no problem. Again, as long as I'm enjoying it, I'll keep playing. So 50's a task, but I do like a challenge.
We'll put you down as a maybe.
We're gonna we're gonna narrow in on a lot of these sort of particularly interesting parts of your career, but can you give us an overview of how you sort of evolved or transformed as a player? Were you exceptionally quick as a teenager and then got a bit more guile to your game, and now you're sort of relying more on experience? Or how did you change? Were you a winger that became a striker, and where are you now?
Okay, probably as a very young kid, I was a centre midfielder, probably up to about 14, 15, central midfield, like to try and run games. I was very quick, so whenever I was in and around the sort of first team at the non-league level, they'd stick me out on the wing or they'd stick me up front, sort of getting behind defences. Started scoring a few goals as a 16-year-old at a team called Saltdean, and then they played me up front from that moment forward. And when you're playing non-league and you're scoring goals in England at that age, scouts start making some noise, and I was lucky enough to get picked up by Millwall. Went into Millwall as a centre forward, and again, probably trying to find a way into the first team as a centre forward as a 16, 17-year-old was so difficult. You've got established pros in the first team who scored goals at different clubs, dropped down the leagues or whatever. So the first time I got a sniff in the first team, the right winger had got injured in training, and then the other right winger had got suspended. So they had a reserve game and they chucked me on the right-hand side for 45 minutes with another lad who'd been playing a little bit more first team minutes than me. And it was basically a case of whoever does well this game plays right midfield. We played 4-4-2. Okay, did just enough to get in the team, played, hit the post. It was like the highlight of my career. I remember bringing my mates on the bus on the way home. I hit the post. It was like amazing. Mum came up to watch the game. I think we played Lincoln away. And then I didn't make the squad for the next few weeks, and had to play in the reserves and the youth team as a forward, and then got another chance on the right wing and managed to get in there. But I think looking back as a sort of 18, 19-year-old, a year on from there, I was playing on the wing. I was quite quick and a decent dribbler, but my crossing was absolutely atrocious. And I've got clips of it. Kids, it's quite funny, but I could always dribble people. So I'd beat 3 or 4 people. The crowd would be stood up, they'd be buzzing, and then I'd kick it straight into the stand. And it would be like one of them. They're up on their seat, they're up, and then oh Jesus, here it goes again. And it took me, I reckon, probably 3 or 4 years to get to a position where I felt like I was comfortable in any kind of crossing position. So as I was coming through at 18, 19, 20, it would be dribbling to goal. If I couldn't get to goal, then I'd probably try and pass early before I got into a crossing position. So I was definitely a very unorthodox winger. Once I learned to cross, made things a lot easier for me. And then I got a pretty bad ankle injury, and the club didn't want me to get the surgery that I needed. So I was playing with painkiller injections, but I couldn't train and kick with my right foot. So probably for about 6 months, I literally trained every day, and I had to use my left over and over again. And it's such a weird thing, but in hindsight, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, them forcing me to play injured, because by the end of that season, after I come back from the surgery, I was pretty much two-footed, and that stood me in good stead for the rest of my career. And I remember actually when I moved to the Phoenix, I remember Tim Brown pulled me after about 3 months, and he said, "Oh, so are you left-footed?" And I was like, "No, I'm right-footed." And it turns out I thought it was a compliment. It was actually not. It was actually he couldn't work out which foot I was because I wasn't very good, as he tells the story. But that's Brownie for you. So, but yeah, I mean, as I got older, I think more guile, a few more tricks. I'm known for the chop. I pretend to go one way as if I'm going to cross, and then I chop inside. The only reason I did that really is because I couldn't do a step over. Every time I tried to step over, I'd fall over it or just look like an idiot. It would be so slow and my legs were so high that nobody would move anyway. So I learned one trick. And even now you hear them, he's going to chop. He's only got one trick. And I love hearing that. That's brilliant. So I chopped twice instead of doing it once.
At Millwall, at Sheffield United, at Crystal Palace, at the Phoenix, were you always like a top 3 in the sprint tests? Were you always like right at the very top?
Yeah. Not so much at the Phoenix. I think by that point I'd worked out that I probably needed to conserve a little bit. You know, my body was on its way out, or I say that and I'm still going, but it was definitely not how it used to be. I think we did. I went to Tasman at 36, and I was second or third in the test. And then we had our team night out at Wairarapa about 3 weeks ago, and a young goalkeeper there, Alex Britton, we were bowling actually in Wellington, and he said, I can't remember how we got onto it. We'd been having a couple of drinks, and he said, "Look, I'm definitely quicker than you now." And I said, "All right, well, let's go." So we walked outside the bowling alley in Welly, you know, down by the cinema, and I said to all the boys were there, I said, "Right, let's do it. 40 meters, me and you now, $50." So one of the boys held a shirt up and said, "When the shirt hits the ground, you go in." So we had somebody at the other end 40 meters away, and I smoked him 40 meters. Honestly, I was buzzing. The boys posted the video on the Wairarapa team page, buzzing with it. So happy. So I always say I've got one sprint at any given time left in me, but only one.
Is there any way we can get our hands on that video?
I can send you that. Yeah.
Yeah, we'd love that. We'd love that. We'll give that a big push. That's brilliant. So, like I said, the last 48 hours have been very Paul Ifill focused, and I watched a really good Lions TV podcast you did, and I'm gonna try to recite the intro because it was a great intro, and then I want to get into one of the most interesting passages. So it's kind of like gives it the voice. I'm gonna try the voice. 238 appearances, 40 goals, spanning across 7 years. An integral part of the 2001 promotion-winning team. He single-handedly took West Ham apart in the Mother's Day massacre, scored the greatest hat-trick I've ever seen live at Cambridge, played in Millwall's only ever UEFA Cup campaign. It's fair to say at Millwall, Paul Ifill achieved it all. And it's
not many people know that Millwall actually have a New Zealander that does the voiceovers. It's incredible.
But my point is, it's had about 10,000 views, and it's just got hundreds of comments, all full of praise about how many memories it brought back and what a legend you were. And I don't know if the New Zealand public perhaps appreciates that. I certainly didn't until I went and listened back. But one of the key parts that caught my attention, and I want to focus in on 2004. So you'd been at Millwall for 6 years, I think, at this point. And it was actually, I think, a podcast Tim Cahill was talking about his defining moment, which was his goal in the 2004 FA Cup semi-final. And I've heard you talk about this as one of the highlights of your career as well. So you played a big part in that goal and in that game and in that win. But could you just give us a bit of backstory about where you were in your career and then focus in on what happened in that game and why it was so great?
Yeah, I think, you know, we were a decent side, obviously outside the Premier League. We'd all come through together. So myself, Tim Cahill, Stephen Reid, a load of guys that ended up going on to play in the Premier League. But at that time, we firmly believed we were all Premier League players in waiting. So it was like, you know, we were doing everything we could to get to the Premier League. And that season, when we won the quarterfinal against Tranmere, we were a very good cup team at the time. And when we got through that, we got together for the semi-final draw. It was Manchester United, Arsenal, Sunderland, and us. So you can imagine Sunderland and us must have been sat there going, "Please draw each other." You know, if you could have zoomed in on both dressing rooms when the draw was announced, we were going mad. Sunderland must have been going mad as well. Sunderland must have been 100% sure they could beat us. We were 100% sure we could beat them. Man U and Arsenal were like, "Oh, how have we managed this?" So we knew from that moment that if the results stayed the same in the Premier League, we were playing in Europe if we won that semi-final. So all of a sudden, the league form started to dwindle a bit. And I think when that draw was made, we were 4th or 5th in the Championship. And in my opinion, we had a team comfortably good enough to go into the Premier League. We'd finished, I think, fourth the year before and lost or 2 years before, lost to Birmingham in the semi-final of the playoffs to go into the Premier League. Birmingham actually ended up getting promoted, so we were pretty close. And we knew Timmy had such a good couple of years that basically we knew that Timmy was going to be sold after the cup final. There was talk of myself being sold. There was talk of a few boys being sold. So we kind of knew that might be our last shot at glory, really. So we managed to sort of hold the league form together until the semi-final, and then that was pretty much our final. We knew that we weren't going to win against one of the two big ones in the final, but if we could actually win that game, we're in Europe. So I remember going into the game, and Dennis Wise had said to me, he always said I was too soft. He said, you're 6'1", big lad, you're too soft. You've got to start giving people a kick. Obviously, it's Wise, he was 5'4" and kicked everybody. So he said, I was playing against Julio Arca, who was an Argentinian, very good player, and a guy called George McCartney at left back, Irish international. And I don't know, 10 minutes into the game, there was a ball sort of loose from Arca, and I thought I can get this. I absolutely cleaned him up. Like, I'm not a big tackler, but it was a cracking tackle, and I don't know why he went past me and slapping me on the arse and going, I love that. That's what I'm talking about. So it's one of them. It's funny that those little things can just make such a difference to your psyche. And I thought, I've impressed Dennis Wise. Like, give me the ball. I'm ready to go. And I don't know. It wasn't too much after that George McCartney took a really big touch. I knew I could get there, so I darted in between, pretended to shoot, did the old chopped inside, and I've watched this so many times. How I did not score. I've just got to take another touch and just pass it in. But I got all excited. I'm just going to whack it. So I whacked it, hit his chest, bounced back, and I thought, oh my God, that's the moment gone. That might be it. And I turned around, and Tim Cahill's there. Side foot, takes a little bit of the deflection, goes in. But that was Timmy, like always stealing the glory, no matter what. And he runs off, and it's that iconic picture of him with his shirt off and all the Millwall fans in the background, and I'm chasing after him. And in the chase, this is what, like I said to you, I've only got a few sprints in me. I pulled my groin. And I had to be I got stretched off the pitch about 2 minutes later. So I managed to start the restart and pretend I hadn't hurt myself. And then I went down and got stretchered off in the semi-final. And that was me for a few weeks until I got back in. I think we played Walsall, and I came back there and made it in time for the final.
What a clusterfuck of emotions that is. You've chopped the man brilliantly. You're gonna score. He saves it. Cahill scores. Elation. You've pulled your groin. Fuck. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. So why do you think Cahill? We'll just have a little Cahill interlude, if that's all right. Why do you think it was? He claims it the most defining moment. Was it after that was the springboard for him to take on the world, basically?
Yeah, I think so. Look, Tim is probably the most confident player I've ever played with. Absolute workhorse, but it didn't matter who we were playing against, what was going on outside. The minute he stepped on the pitch, he felt he was the best player. So when he moved to Everton, and I remember when I moved to Sheffield, it was quite daunting. There was a lot of players that had played at a higher level than me, and it took me a little bit of time to settle in. But Timmy would have gone into Everton believing that he was the best player there, which was definitely not true, but it didn't matter. He went in, I'm the best, get me the ball, put the ball in the box, I'll head it in the net. And he used to ring me. And I used to say, how was training? He's like, it's a lot harder. But he said, you know me, I'll just get the ball in the box and I'll head it in the net. And that was him. And that was him for his whole career. And he's still like it now as a coach. He might have that self-doubt, but he's never going to tell you. You'd never, ever know it. And I think that got him way further than it would get others. He wasn't the best player I ever played with, but arguably he had the best career out of all of us coming through. And that's testament to how hard he was willing to work and the level of confidence that he always displayed.
Little guys who are exceptional in the air. Cahill, you think about the best headers of the ball in the world. Tim Cahill comes to mind. What is it? Is it purely about timing, or is it the athleticism, or the combination?
Combination. He always used to say that he used to go down the park with his dad, and it was his dad who said to him, along with another coach when he was really little, you need a point of difference. And if you can time your runs into the box and get the technique right, it could be a massive difference to your game. And we saw it really early on in training. And, he was jumping like he was 6'5", and he could hang. And there's only probably a couple of other people I've seen in the game like worldwide. We're talking worldwide that can do that. Les Ferdinand was another one. And Les wasn't massive. He was a big lump, but he was. I think he only just about scraped 6 foot, but he could hang. It's like Tim could get up before you. You'd be back down, and he's still up there, and you think, well, how's he managed that? But then to also have the wherewithal to direct it as well. And the other thing about him, he was super brave. There was times I see him get elbows in the face, get kicked in the face, going in for diving headers, but it didn't matter. If there was an opportunity to get his head on the end of a ball and potentially score a goal, don't worry about it. He was always there.
Yeah, incredible. We'll continue on. So you're into the FA Cup final. You've got this injured groin. That's playing on your mind. How many weeks between the semi and the final? 2 weeks, was it?
There was a few weeks in the end because I think we had about 4 or 5 games left of the league season. Then you had a break of about 2 weeks. So it's quite a long time. So even though I was a little worried, I remember thinking if I can just give it 3 or 4 weeks, I've still got another 3 or 4 weeks of proving my fitness. And I got back in, and I think he made me sub in a couple of games, and I went to see Wisey and said, look, I want to play in the final. And he said, well, we've got a league to try and get out of first, and you need to prove yourself in the league. And I scored against Walsall. I scored like a scissor volley, and I remember going over and celebrating in front of him. And but he was one of them who loved all that sort of stuff. He was like, yeah, go on, get in. He loved it. So that sort of cemented my spot, and that was it. It was just a case of staying fit in training and in the games, and our league form went to pot because people were jumping out of tackles, and we didn't want to nobody wanted to get injured. This was a chance of a lifetime. The level we were at, the chances of any of us playing an FA Cup final again was super slim. So it was unlucky. We finished 9th in the league, and ultimately that was probably the reason we didn't get promoted to the Premier League with Millwall.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the semi-final was probably the final. You've made it to Europe. You're coming up against Man United, who at that stage, reasonably star-studded team. What's the mentality going into that day? Is the morning of as amazing as everybody describes it, or is there a little bit of doubt? Do you park that? What does that all look like?
Well, so my lead up to the final was probably different to my teammates. So I was with my ex-girlfriend at the time, and she decided after 6 years that a week before the cup final would be a good time to finish the relationship. So yeah. No, she was right. I was a bit of a dickhead. So she was probably bang on. So we're doing the team song. We're doing the suit fittings. There's all sorts of stuff going on that I'll never do again. And I'm there like sad sack, just like. And I remember Ray Wilkins, who was our coach. He's passed now, but legend. What a guy! What a coach! So he was our assistant coach, and Wisey was our head coach. And there was this one day, I think it was the suit fitting day, and the boys were moaning about how long the suit fitting was taking. And Ray got us all in together, and he said, "Listen here," he said, "I've played in a few cup finals," and he said, "This might be the only time you ever play in a cup final." So he said, "You better take every single minute of this in, because it's nothing better than playing with your mates." Because he knew most of us had come through together. He said, "You're playing with your mates and you're going to play in a cup final. You've got to take every minute of this in. And if someone doesn't want to be here, they've got to let me know now." And so me being an idiot was like, I don't want to be here. And Ray went ballistic. That came to me. And that was not like him at all. So all the boys walk off, and none of the boys knew what was really going on. And Ray pulls me aside and said, "What is that about?" And I said, "Oh, Ray." And I told him. And he said, "Right, come in the office." So I went in the office with him and Wisey in the office. Ray tells Wisey, I told Ray on the way in, Ray tells Wisey, his missus has dumped him, a week before the cup final. He's gutted, thinks he doesn't want to play. And Wisey looks up from his desk and he's like, "Pardon? Ice, you're a week away from the cup final." He said, "You play in the cup final, there's going to be girls throwing themselves at you. What are you fucking worried about?" so then Ray being the good cop goes, "Dennis, I understand that, but Ives is telling us that he loves this girl and he's a bit heartbroken." So that now I'm in the room, these two having an argument over who's right and wrong and whether I should be allowed to be a little bit upset or not. So they sort of agree to disagree, realise that I'm struggling a little bit, but Dennis is still of the mindset that I should sort my shit out and get ready for the cup final, and not worry too much about it because I'm going to have anybody I want once we've finished. So that was how it was left. They kind of gave me a bit of leeway leading in. you know, because I wanted to check my phone to see if she texted me, you know, and it was one of them. It was a tough time, and yeah. So in the end, she did come to the cup final, even though we'd split up, and that was pretty much the end of it. And like in hindsight, it was the right move. She's now married with children, and so am I, and we both seem pretty happy. So it did work out in the end, but at the time, the timing was awful. And I remember saying to her, like, couldn't you have just waited like 2-3 days after the cup final? That would have been suitable.
Yeah. Amazing. Take us to game day. I think Shay might have undersold it a bit. I had a bit of a decent team. But Giggs, Roy Keane, Paul Scholes, Ronaldo, Van Nistelrooy. What's it like when are you seeing them for the first time? Is it actually in the tunnel, like heading out?
Yeah, so we've done all the analysis, obviously, fully ready to go. And we decided the plan was we'll try and get to half-time 0-0. And then if we go out second half and just give it 45 of everything we've got, the likelihood is we're not going to get walloped. Like, we didn't want to get beat 7-8-0 in a cup final. So we're thinking if we give everything in a half and we get beat 2-0, 3-0, we can absolutely take that. So, like I said, we felt prepared, and Ray and Wisey, who'd played at that level a lot, had said, look, they're just guys like us. You know, they bleed, they get tired, they make mistakes. And we felt pretty confident that we could potentially cause an upset or keep it close. Then you do your warm up and you see them out on the pitch and they look bigger than you, they look quicker than you, they look stronger than you, and it's like, oh, geez. And then you come back in and they Wisey and Ray talk to you again, and you feel $1 million, and you're like, nah, we've got this. Then you get into the tunnel, and then you try not to look at them, and then you have a little peer to your left, and you see Roy Keane, you're like, oh my God, don't want to go near him. And then, like you said, there's Giggs, oh my goodness, Van Nistelrooy, Scholes. And at the time, Ronaldo wasn't Ronaldo. Ronaldo, in the analysis, they told me to pick the Portuguese lad up from corners. Right? So he's younger than me. So I'm thinking, I'm okay defensively in the air. This won't be too much of an issue. So we go out, we're playing well. Things are going great, to be fair. It's 44 minutes, 0-0. So in my head, I'm thinking, we're nearly there. Like, we've nearly got to half time, 0-0. So they get a corner. I'm marking Ronaldo. Corner gets swung in over the back. Everybody misses it. So I'm thinking, for a minute to go, like this, I can do him on the counter. So I start running up the pitch. As it's got the other side, it gets swung back in. My guy, Ronaldo, makes his way back into the box. I'm nowhere to be seen. Rises like a salmon, heads it in the net, 1-0. So, I mean, looking back, I'm kind of glad I wasn't in the box, because he'd have jumped right over me and made me look even worse. Anyway, even if I'd been there. But when we went in at half time, Wisey was going mad. Whose man was that? And thankfully at the time, he'd got between Wisey and Neil Harris, our centre forward. So it looked in real time like it was their fault, not mine. So I kind of sat in the corner and hoped that nobody would notice until a later date. And podcasts like this where I have to hold my hand up and say it was
me. The other character I'm fascinated to hear about is Roy Keane. Was it the only time you'd played against him, and what was his presence like on the field?
Yeah, Keane, absolute legend. At the time, he was playing in his 5th FA Cup final, so everybody wanted his shirt. It was the one to get, really. There was a few others, obviously, with the likes of Giggs and Van Nistelrooy, but everybody wanted Keane's, and we'd all talked about it going in. And with about a minute or two of the game left, we're 3-0 down. Me and Roy Keane, this is how I tell the story, me and Roy Keane going for a 50-50. It was about an 80-20, maybe a 90-10 in my favour, and I shit myself. And by the time I got there, it was now a 50-50. So I definitely should have got it. We clattered each other, missed the ball completely. We both needed treatment. So at the time, you had to go off once there was treatment if there was no yellow cards. So we both go off the side of the pitch. And I'm stood next to Roy Keane, and I thought, this is my chance. And I'm just about to ask him for his shirt, and he turns around to me and he says, "Well played today, son," and just gives me like a little pat on the head. And it was like, I was 24 at the time, so I wasn't like a little kid, but I felt like a little kid in that moment. It was like, wow, thanks, Roy. And I said, is there any chance I can have your shirt? And he said, yes, see me in the tunnel after. I'll have it for you. So cool. Game finishes. They do all their celebrations. Obviously, we go up and get our second place medals and all that palaver. Probably 45 minutes has gone by now, and I'll walk down the tunnel thinking there's no chance Roy Keane is in the tunnel with his shirt. Roy Keane's in the tunnel with his shirt off, and I'm like, shit, this is a really weird moment because I know there's no way Roy Keane wants my shirt. No chance in the world. But I've kind of got to offer it because I look like a dick if I don't offer it. So I kind of grabbed my shirt like this without saying anything and sort of went like that. And he was like, nah, it's okay, son. So he handed me the shirt. So I walked back into our changing room. And all the boys are talking about the shirts that they've swapped with and all this. And there's a bit of uproar because one of the boys who'd come on as sub, a big centre forward called Mark McCammon, has got Cristiano Ronaldo's shirt. Now, Ronaldo in the final was unbelievable. He ripped our left back to shreds. And, everybody believed that the left back should have the shirt. And the big fella Mark was like, nah, got it, I'm having it. So that was the end of that. So the lad who was sat next to me, David Livermore, real good mate of mine, centre midfielder, he's been the coach most recently of Cardiff, and he was at Millwall as well. He said, I said, what's up with you? Because he looked gutted. And I said, we got beat 3-0 by a better team. He said, it's not that. He said, at half time I spoke to Roy Keane and he told me he'd give me his shirt. And I'm like, oh God. He said, whose shirt did you get? And I'm like, oh, I've got Roy Keane's shirt behind my back. So I said, oh, whose did you get? And he said, nobody is as good as you by the looks of it. So I said, I'll tell you what we do. We'll toss a coin and the winner gets Roy Keane. So my mum lives in New Zealand now. She lives in Tahuna, and in her front room she's got 2 shirts, a Millwall one saying Eiffel and the one next to it saying Butt. Nicky Butt was who I ended up with, and David Livermore got Roy Keane's.
Hey, you know what, Nicky Butt?
But yeah, guy was a legend. He was unbelievable. Unbelievable on the day. He was half fit. He wasn't even supposed to play in the final. They were saying, I think he had a calf issue. It was one of them where he always had time. It didn't matter. If you thought you had him, he'd play 1 touch, and then the next time he'd take 2 touches, and you think you'd be able to get him, couldn't get him. You just couldn't get anywhere near him. He barely got out of first gear, and he always looked like he had time and space. Always knew where everybody else was on the pitch. It was one of them you come away from it and you're like, geez, that is the difference between where we are and where we need to be.
Isn't it really interesting that you say that? And that's almost exactly how players here describe you. It's just those different levels. It's just those different levels up, right? Like it's kind of same but different.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I look at him and he was coming towards the end of his career, or late. I think it was to late 30s at that point, and he just knew the game inside out. He just knew, and he had this almost like this radar, and it didn't matter. You thought you had him and you didn't. He always was 1 step ahead of you, and I think that is what you at a different level. You look at the absolute top players, your Iniestas and your Xavis. They never give the ball away because they've got this radar system that's always buzzing away. And I think, I don't know if that's the same when I'm playing, but I do feel like I've got a little bit more time and space because I'm used to having to look for players, I suppose, at a higher level. So that when I played as a pro, I didn't have that time because somebody's ready to kick you up the arse and nick it off you. So I think that you do carry that with you.
That Man United team, I'm guessing, is the best team that you've ever played against, or that collection of players. How far? I mean, you played in the Premier League. You're in the same league as this team. Could you envisage a world where you could get to that level? Like, were they cut and dry better than you, or were you close? Were you knocking on the door in your absolute prime?
I think I was close. I don't think I was ever consistent enough. And even now, I'm the same. It's sometimes I'm week to week, sometimes I'm minute to minute, and I can do a great thing and then look like I've never played football. So I think I always had that, and I always when I'm talking to my players now, I always talk about having a level of consistency. And David Livermore, for instance, who I played with, was a 7 out of 10 every single week. He was never a 10, and he was never a 4. He was just, you knew exactly what you were going to get for him. And I loved that. And I could never get there. There was weeks when I was absolutely unplayable. And there was weeks when I used to think, why is the coach even picking me. I'm so bad. So I always really struggle with consistency. I really think that's the difference. If you look at the absolute top players, your Ronaldos and your Messis, for instance, when do they ever dip? They just don't. They just go week in, week out, and they're always of that level. And that fascinates me, because I just think that must be mindset as well. It's got to be, because there's so many players. I look at someone like a Nani, and when Nani was at Manchester United with Ronaldo, there were times when he was just as good. There's no question. Some of the things he could do with the ball were astonishing. But why didn't you do it every week? So that must come down to mindset. So yeah, I just think I didn't quite have the consistency and the mindset. I think when I made the Premier League, I rubbed my hands and I was like, oh, I've done it. That was goal reached. Rather than going, right, let's reset. I now need to be a established Premier League player. I went out and bought a Porsche and bought a nice new house and bought my missus a car and started eating more takeaways and making sure I was on the list at the nearest nightclub, rather than doubling down and going, right, I've got this far, let's go again. And I don't think I ever did. And when I realised that, it was too late, and I'd been sold by that point to Palace, and never made it back into the Premier League. So it's, again, I try and preach that to the kids I'm working with now, that, if you're goal setting, make sure that when you do get there, if you're lucky enough to reach a goal that you've set, reset and go again.
Paul, tell us about Dennis Wise, because he went from being your teammate to your coach, and you're doing a lot of player coaching at the moment in the last few years. Was that a difficult transition for someone who's been your teammate to then command your respect, or how did that work? I mean, he got you to the FA Cup final. Was it a huge success?
He did it really easily, and I think the easier part was because of where he played and what he'd done and his reputation. He played for England. He didn't really change. He just became the guy picking the team, pretty much. It was the same banter. He hammered me before he was coach. He hammered me after he was coach, and nothing really changed. And the thing with him that I always liked, that he would give you a bollocking when you needed it. He'd put an arm around your shoulder if you needed it, but he was always leading by example. There were times when he did some shit that I wouldn't copy with his tackling and, some of the other stuff. But in terms of how he approached the game and his professional mindset and some of the things he did in training, and I always speak about that now as a coach. Most of the young kids will learn so much more from their senior players than they do from the coaches, just by mimicking how they hold themselves, what they do on the pitch, what they do off the pitch. And certainly for Dennis, I would take in how he struck the ball, how he would shoot, how he would find space. And I was sort of, like I said, I think I was mid-20s and I thought I knew the game. And then watching him play, even at 37, I was like, wow, there's so much that I don't know yet. And again, I think that's kind of what I try and do now as a player coach. Yes, I'll help you where I can with bits and pieces, but also watch how I do things, because I think that can be just as powerful as the spoken word, really.
Is it easy sometimes as a player coach to rely on the playing aspect and sub yourself on, or try and use yourself to get yourself out of a hole, or play, in Neil Emblen's case when he was player coach, play yourself ahead of Stephen?
Yeah. So that's what Dennis did a little bit at the start. And I also did that at the start. And I had 2 years at Wairarapa coaching the men's team. And my intention was to not play. And then we had a couple of games where we were struggling. So I put myself on the bench and, things are going on. And I'm thinking, I could do this, I could do that, or I could just come on. And most of the time I would come on and I would be able to affect the game because I was still good enough at that time at that level. And after 2 years, Phil Kinsley sacked me. And at the time I was absolutely devastated. And I still work with Phil. I play for Phil still now, actually, which is quite funny. But I always say it to him, and I always think he thinks I'm taking the piss. But I honestly look back and think, I'm so glad he sacked me, because it made me realise that I can't rely on a past playing career, because at some point I've got to stop. So I thought I need to go and coach somewhere where I can't get involved. So I went back to youth football, and then I went into women's football. And as much as I'd like to come on sometimes in both those games, I can't. So it's made me find other ways, and I think it's been really, really beneficial for me as a coach to be able to analyze the game better. A lot of times I think as a player you don't see the game as you should. You're too busy watching this and watching that, and what a great skill and what a great cross. But what's actually going on? What are the problems? How do I need to fix things to potentially make us better? And I think in youth football and in women's football, it's the only way. I've got no other recourse. It's the only thing I can do, and it's been brilliant for me. And obviously, I think that's led to me being more successful as a coach, and to the Samoa job, which has just popped up in the last couple of months.
We'll get to that stuff before we leave the UK too much. Hopefully, football aficionados that listen to the podcast have an appreciation for Millwall, but for those that don't, it can be quite a volatile environment for a visiting team to come and play. But what's it like when those fans are backing you and you're playing at the New Den? What is that really like?
I don't know. They didn't like me. No, I'm only joking. It was difficult at times. It was difficult at times. Look, when you first come through, if you don't understand what it's all about, you find out pretty quickly. And at times, like I said, I was inconsistent. So I was a little bit of a luxury player. And the fans let me know in no uncertain terms that I needed to track back and I needed to work hard. And if I did that, they would forgive you anything. And once you have them on your side, there's nothing like it. And there were some tough times and there were some good times. But I look back now and think, cool, that really stood me in good stead, because if you're not doing well, they'll certainly let you know about it, and it's tough. But you know, when things are going well, there's no place like it. And it was a bit like having, if you watch the Wellington Phoenix games and you've got the fever, and it's not too many fans there, but they're so vocal and they're so behind the team. And you know, we used to love that. Well, we used to have a stadium full of people like that. You know, when it's going well, they're all over you, and it was magnificent. And I think that's kind of why I liked coming to the Phoenix, because it was a little bit similar in the sense that with Millwall, it was us against them, and no one likes us. You know, that's our theme. And it was a bit like that with the Phoenix in terms of, you know, all of Australia at the time didn't really like us. We were the bookmakers' favourite to finish bottom. And I remember when I looked online and saw that, I was like, oh, this is a bit of me. This is going to be good. Let's get into these Aussies. And that was the case. And we had a good season. So I think that definitely stood me in good stead at the start of my career. And it was good to finish at a club that was similar at the end of my career.
Millwall's also, when things didn't go well, linked to a lot of hooliganism. Was that something you experienced? Did you see that up front? Did you have any scary sort of runs?
Yeah, so there was a period where, so my mum's white, my dad's black, and there was a time where I was playing particularly badly and I was getting a lot of racist abuse. So my mum would come and sit in the stand, but the fans, if my dad was there, they wouldn't say it in front of my dad being black, but they'd say it in front of my mum, not even realising that we were linked. So there were times when her little boy's getting absolutely hammered, you know, just for trying to play football and not doing it very well. So there was a quite a long period in my career where she didn't go to the games, which was pretty sad. And being in the Championship, the games wouldn't be on TV. So that was pretty sad. My mum would go to the away games, and it seemed to be better at the away games. And she'd go with my uncle. And then just talking about the hooliganism, there was a time in 2003 we lost in the playoffs, I talked about earlier, against Birmingham. And the minute that Birmingham scored, they scored a 94th minute winner, Stern John. And you could feel the atmosphere in the ground just change like in an instant. And we all ran off the pitch, and as the referee's blown the whistle, we've gone down the tunnel, and the fans have come on the pitch, and they've tried to let the Birmingham fans go first. So they let them go. Then our fans were locked in the ground for what seemed like ages. So we've gone in, we've got change, we've come back out, and we could hear it all sort of kicking off. So loads of us have put a ladder up on there's like a first aid sort of shed, and we're standing on this first aid shed in our suits, like drinking a beer, looking over the top, and the Millwall fans are fighting the police. And when I say fighting, it was full blown. They're trying to punch police horses. They're breaking down walls from people's front gardens to get the bricks to throw at the police. It was crazy. And then when my mum left the ground, they couldn't get out of the ground till 2 o'clock in the morning. So the game had finished, 10 o'clock. They couldn't get out of the ground till 2 in the morning. My friend had actually drove them to the game. So they're walking down the street to get back to the car, and all these Millwall fans came running past. Thought my family were Birmingham supporters. So my uncle's like, no, we're Millwall, like shielded them. And thankfully the Millwall supporters like ran off. They get down to the road when my friend had parked his car. All these cars are turned over. There's cars burning and, cars looted. And he gets to his car and pulls the handle, and he'd left the car open, and it was a crappy green Maestro. So people must have walked down the street and thought this car's already been done. It was that bad. So thankfully they managed to get out there and get home. But the fallout was that a lot of the CCTV had just sort of come in at this time, and a lot of the fans were guys who lived and worked in the city and would just come out to Millwall to have a fight at the weekend. And it was white collar guys who lawyers, solicitors, people in finance. And they just came down at the weekend to Millwall to have a tear up. And I remember it was on the front of the Evening Standard, and there was like 26 faces of all these bods in their suits, and they all got done. So it was a weird time. But they're very loyal fans, and the hooliganism seems to have sort of been eradicated now. I think with CCTV and the way the world's gone, it's almost impossible. But I'm sure they still manage to have a little go in the odd car park when they can.
What a wild time. I think this is great, Paul. Can I just say 50 minutes in and we're still on Millwall because there's so much to talk about. This is incredible. I want to move along though. So 7 years at Millwall, you're a legend. You've had this great stint. Why did you leave? And run us through the sort of next couple of years after that.
Yeah, so the club was in a bit of a financial crisis. They sold to Cahill and a couple of others, and the season had finished. And the chief exec came to me and he said, "Look, we've accepted an offer from Sheffield United. They've had a bit of a cash injection. They're going to try and get promoted to the Premier League, and they see you as sort of the last piece of the puzzle." And I said, "I don't care. I'm not going." I said, "I don't want to leave. I'm happy here." And he said, "Look, we've accepted an offer. You're going to have to go and speak to him." And I was actually in tears. I was absolutely gutted. Didn't want to leave. Felt that we just had to sort of try and find a little bit of money, sort of reinvest the FA Cup money that had supposedly gone missing into getting one or two players, and we'd have a right shot at doing it. And then he said, "Oh, look, it looks like Darren Ward's going to leave." He was a centre back at the time, and he was another good player. I think he ended up going to Palace, if my memory serves right. But that was it. So I was like, "Oh, right." So I spoke to my agent. My agent said, "Yeah, you've got to go up to Sheffield. You've got to meet Neil Warnock." So I went up there, met Neil. One of the weirdest guys you'll ever meet. Really nice guy, but really strange. Completely sold me on the club. Told me everything I wanted to hear. I'm the last piece of the puzzle. I'll score loads of goals under him. I'll be a legend at Sheffield United. Blah blah blah. So I agreed to sign, and the day I was travelling up there, I get on the train and I get a phone call, and it was Mark McGee, who used to be my coach at Millwall, and he said, "I hear you're signing for Sheffield." I said, "Yeah, I'm on my way. I'm just literally getting on the train. I'm pretty excited." He said, "Please don't sign today." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I've got a friend of mine who is just about to sign at a bigger club as coach, and he wants you." And I'm like, I said, I still call him Gaffer. To this day, I still call him Gaffer. I said, "Gaffer, you're going to have to give me more than that." I said, "I can't ring my agent and ring Sheffield and say I'm not signing because a friend of a friend is taking over a club." I said, "Give me something." And he said, "Look, I can't tell you who it is," but he said, he's my best friend in football. He said, "He's seen you play before and he will be signing for a bigger club than Sheffield United." So I rang my agent, and my agent just started laughing down the phone. He said, what can I do with this?" He said, "You've asked me to get you the deal. I've got you the deal, so go and sign the deal." So I got to Sheffield to sign the deal. Next day, Gordon Strachan is announced as Celtic's new manager. Oh my God, can't believe it. But, in a funny kind of way, it worked out because as a kid, I didn't dream of playing in the Scottish Premier League. I dreamt of playing in the English Premier League, and we got there and we got promoted, and getting promoted to the Premier League is unbelievable. Like, for me, there's nothing like it. It must be great getting signed by a Premier League club, but actually getting promoted with a bunch of boys that you worked so hard with all year was pretty special too.
I've always had a question about that, getting promoted to the Premier League. Is there any sense of you're at a club, you're living nearby, the family's all settled, you know that if you get promoted to the Premier League, there's a really good chance they're going to bring in 20 to 30% new players, and there's a chance you're going to be out. Whereas if you stay in the same division you're in, things will probably be pretty comfortable and you'll keep the gig. Is there any sense of that creeping in?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of both, but I think it's player to player as well. And I think that year I'd got 9 goals playing on the wing. I'd got, I think, 9 or 10 assists. I think the top scorer that year only got 10. So I felt pretty valuable, and I thought if I get fitter, get in the gym, work hard over the summer. There's no reason why I won't be a part of the squad. And I think because it was Sheffield and it wasn't a bigger club, and that's no disrespect to Sheffield by any stretch, but we didn't have a lot of money. It wasn't like we were going to go and sign all these superstars. We were expecting to sign 2 or 3. And I still felt, given what I'd done, I might be able to, even if I was on the bench, I'd make an impact off the bench and fight my way back in. That didn't happen in the end, and that was more down to me than anything else. But we signed a few, but they were sort of guys that were a little bit older, or they'd played in a different league and they were coming back, and it was not quite, no superstars came rolling in. So most of the squad went, oh, okay, we'll have a go. We'd all negotiated deals previously where we got, either a bonus for getting in the Premier League, or we got our wages upped anyway. So I think most of the boys were just like, oh, we're Premier League players, we're earning Premier League-ish money, and we've kind of cracked it. And the ones that thought like that weren't there very long, including me. And the ones that thought this is a real opportunity to push on stayed there and had great careers, like Phil Jagielka, for instance.
We need to veer off into a little Neil Warnock tangent, because he seems to be an incredibly complex, fun character. One of the viral clips is his team talk. I think the Lescott one, and he's absolutely barracking team. Was that kind of a standard Warnock team talk? Did he just lose his rag all the time, or was he just a fiery character?
Before the game, during the game, after the game, all the time. But he was a great man manager. He wasn't great tactically. I would often go out not really knowing what he wanted from me, but I'd always go out feeling $1 million. And I'd always think, there's nothing I can't do. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do whatever I want. And hopefully that's enough. And if we won, he was buzzing after the game. And he was just so unorthodox. Some of the things he said and did, you'd be like, oh, I can't believe he's just said that. But he was the only person who could get away with it. But I had many run-ins with him, but he was good in the sense that if you had an argument with him in the heat of the moment, he would never ever hold a grudge. And I've never told a coach to fuck off as much as I told him, and he never. It was never the next day, come and see me in my office. You're a disgrace for talking to me like that. It was like, oh, heat of the moment, no problem. I used to be a player. I used to tell the coach to fuck off as well, and that's kind of how it goes. And he was great like that. He was probably too honest for me at the time. I said I wanted an honest coach, and somebody would tell me when I wasn't very good, and often he told me I wasn't very good and I didn't like it. So I pretended that's what I wanted, but I actually didn't like to hear it. So I think I look back and he would have been great for me if I'd have had the right mindset at that time.
Is it true he once dropped you because his wife had a dream?
Yeah,
not Luther King.
Yeah, no. So when I signed, when you sign at a new club, you've got to be careful because the boys have you up with all sorts of different stuff. So the first thing was they told me that his wife had dreams and that he often changes the team, and I just didn't believe it. I just thought it was just bollocks. It's just the boys trying to suck me in. And then the first game of the season, the boys all told me that you had to wear your own suit and your own gear. So I turned up to the game in a beautiful suit, and all the boys are in tracksuits and they're buzzing because I look like a dickhead. So you take it with a pinch of salt, and then we'd got, I don't know, halfway through, maybe 3/4 of the way through the season, and we were playing against Sheffield Wednesday in the derby. Now, I was buzzing to play in a derby, and we worked all week on what we were going to be doing. Yeah, so I was driving to the game, speaking to the missus and my daughter at the time, Romy, about what was going to go on and how excited I was to be playing, etc., etc. And the phone goes, and it was Tony Daly, who used to play for Aston Villa. He was our fitness coach. Pick up the phone. Hey, Dales, what's going on? He said, oh, the gaffer wants to see you in his office before you go in. Don't go into the change room. Go straight in to see the gaffer. So I put the phone down. I said to my missus, I'm being dropped. She went, how'd you know that? I said, babe, you don't go in and see the gaffer without seeing the boys unless you're being dropped. I know that. I've been in football long enough. She's like, oh, don't be like that. You don't know. And so then me and her are having a row over the fact that I'm definitely being dropped and she thinks I'm not. So get out of the car, go into the office. Sit down, son. So I sit down. Said, oh, you're not going to like this, but the wife's had a dream. And I just start laughing because I'm like, is he in on it? Do you know what I mean? These fuckers are sucking me in somehow here. What's going on? I'm not going to play you, son. I'm like, but I was in the team yesterday. What do you mean you're not going to play me? I can't. I'm going to play Quinny. I'm like, what? so I'd been in the team most of the year over Quinny. Quinny was a good player, and Quinny had been signed by Sheffield Wednesday, and he'd scored in the derby for Sheffield Wednesday against Sheffield United a year or two before. So I'm fuming. Going to the change rooms, the boys are like, "Oh, where have you been?" I said, "Oh, the gaffer's just pulled me in and dropped me playing Quinny." Quinny was there. He obviously already knew. And the boys were like, "Oh, what's he said?" I said, "Oh, he's fucking told me the wife's had a dream," and the boys they're in stitches. So I'm absolutely devastated. The boys are absolutely cracking up because they've obviously seen it before. And that was that. So I was going to sit on the bench and I'm watching the game and it's flipping 0-0 and it was and Quinny's not playing well and I'm thinking, I've got to get on in a minute. And ball gets played in, bounces to Quinny, bang, wallop, flipping 1-0. Quinny scores the winner. First player in history to score for both sides in the derby. So at this point, I can't even go and see the gaffer on the Monday and tell him he was wrong because he was absolutely right. So that was the end of that. And thankfully, there was no more dreams involving me throughout the rest of my career because obviously he followed me to Palace a season after that, and I had him for another 2.5 years at Palace. So that was the last dream that his wife had about me, thankfully.
Amazing. Right, a few threads I'm going to try to link together here. I'm not sure if you're aware, I have a bit of a background in poker. So I was a professional poker player for a few years. I've spoken a little bit about gambling and my issues with gambling, and I don't sports bet anymore. We talked about that on a previous podcast. And I actually read Keith Gillespie's book, How Not to Be a Football Millionaire, a few years ago, which was an incredibly eye-watering read. He blew about £7 million, I think. He talked about £47,000 in one afternoon in '95. You were teammates with him 10 years later at Sheffield United, and I've heard you speak about gambling before, and I understand you might even be doing some talking, some sort of public speaking around it. First of all, what were your experiences with Keith? Was he out of control at that point? And then if you could talk, if you feel like it, about your own experiences with gambling.
Yeah, I'll only scratch the surface a little bit here because I'm actually in the middle of writing a book and I don't want to say too much because not too many people know much about me sort of historically. And I think the gambling will be a little bit of a eye-opener for them. So I did room with Keith. I went up to Sheffield and he was my roommate. He was, when you talk about levels, he was another level with the gambling. But, I was pretty bad myself. So it got to the stage where he would be online, he'd be gambling, he'd be like, "Oh, do you want to have a bet?" And I'm like, "I'm trying to stay off it." And he'd be like, "Nah, come on, let's have a bet." So we'd bet. Then he'd find 4 football games worldwide to bet on. And if there weren't football games, he'd be like, "I'm just looking at the hockey in Canada and so-and-so are top of the league and they're playing so-and-so in third. So for me, that's a home win. What do you reckon?" And he'd be like, "Yeah, we'll stick that in the accumulator." So we're betting on stuff that we've got absolutely no idea on, but just to get a buzz, on an afternoon, we might be in a hotel doing nothing. We're bored, so all the boys are asleep, and I called him Bestie. Everybody called him Bestie after George Best because he was Northern Irish and he was the next big thing supposedly. And I'd be like, "Bestie, let's just get some sleep." He'd be like, "No, I want to stay out." So he'd have the lights on. He'd be betting on anything, and then he'd want to bet on which fly would land on which wall next. He was just so ultra competitive. It didn't matter. And I've read his book, and it's astonishing what he was up to. And I would say probably the period I was with him, I saw him bet 1,000, 20,000 like it was nothing. And the trouble is, you do try and keep up. And it's almost keeping up appearances. He was earning more money than me. He'd earned more money than me. He played at a higher level than me. But you're sort of thinking, if he's betting 10 on there, to be betting at least a couple of thousand, or it looks bad. So you're trying to keep up appearances, and you're both losing money. So it made no sense whatsoever. And it's easy for me to see now. Like you said, I've been round. I go round a lot of the rugby clubs. Last year, I spoke with the Crusaders, which was brilliant. And I talk about the pitfalls of gambling and risk and those sorts of things. So it's cool that I get to do that. I think if I could go back and lose my first ever horse bet, I would have rather that happened.
Yeah, that's the way. I always think when you're in the pokie machines, you do not want to be a winner in your first experience because it's going to send you down a bad path.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I have just got into is listening to the Secret Footballer series audio books.
Yeah.
And you're referenced in one of them. I've only just started the second one, and the geezer, whoever the geezer is, I don't know if you know who the Secret Footballer is, but he talked about Mark McGee and going to Millwall, and you were one of the few people that I think might have even just welcomed him there. But some of the, again, talk about eye-watering stories. Some of the stuff that's through that series is pretty interesting listening or reading as well. Are those things really accurate to your experiences, some of the things that are spoken about, or some of the attitudes towards modern football? I don't know if you've read them or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I've read a couple. I've got an idea who he is. Not guaranteed, but I've got an idea. There's been rumours for years that it's 2 or 3 people, and to be fair, they all fit the bill. It wouldn't surprise me if it was a couple of people. Actually, that would have been quite smart to spread the wealth. But yeah, I mean, I've got a WhatsApp group with a couple of my former teammates at Millwall. Like there's 20 odd of us, and some of the things we talk about now, we're like, goodness me, I'm so glad there was no social media. I'm so glad there was no camera phones. I mean, some of the things we did, when you were away in Tenerife, when you're away in Magaluf, and you're just doing pure stupidness. And these days, you can't do anything. The Premier League players cannot do a thing. So it's great. Everybody looks in and goes, they're earning $100,000 a week. It must be, and mate, you can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. It's great. You might have a missus, you might have a really nice house and a nice car, but most of the time you're going to training, you're going home, you're going to training, you're going home, you're playing at the weekend, and that's it. Because you can't go out to a restaurant because everybody's going to be bothering you. And one of the things I liked was that I was never that big, so I never had to deal with that side of it. And when I was at Millwall or Palace or Sheffield, no one bothered me because I was just a run-of-the-mill footballer. And I think when you got to the Phoenix, people either liked football and were really polite to you, or didn't even know the Phoenix were and followed rugby, so didn't bother you. So it was easy. There was no rival clubs over here, so it was a very different environment. So yeah, a lot of that secret footballer stuff definitely went on. I think the reason that he's the only one who speaks about it, because I don't think anybody would like to put themselves above the parapet and actually say, yeah, I was involved in this, or he was involved in that, because I think there'd be a lot of divorces, there'd be probably a lot of court cases, and probably a lot of trouble historically. I don't know if it goes past the statute of limitations, but there'd be some trouble, that's for sure.
I feel like Gillespie wrote about that in his book. He's like, yeah, anyone can say, they won't cheat on their missus. You tell me that after you've had 5 10s throwing themselves at you on a night out after a few beers, It's like,
I mean, I've been out and I've been out and seen the Premier League boys. And I remember one time going out, and I won't say who they were, but there were 2 Premier League players at Liverpool, and I was out in a club in Liverpool. They were sat at the table with champagne. There was a queue from where they were sat at one end of the club out to the edge of the club and out the door to go and sit down and speak to them. And it was some of the hottest women I've ever seen. And they were just queued up in 2s and 3s. And these 2 lads would have a chat with them for a couple of minutes, send them off, and the next 2 would come in. And so you can see how you can get sucked into that very easily. So it's, yeah, again, that was back in the day when you could go out probably a little bit more and you weren't going to get yourself in as much trouble because social media wasn't around. And, nowadays there's blogs and vlogs, and you just can't get away with anything. Somebody's always up in your business. And I think, those guys must find it difficult, and they get paid well. So they just have to deal with what's going on, I suppose.
Yeah, just to touch on one of the things you said before, you mentioned you were talking to the Crusaders a bit about gambling. What other parts of your journey did you share with them to help them? Like, what other things could they learn from you?
I think I try and talk about the mindset stuff that we've gone through already, and how it's so important to reset your goals. Obviously talk about the gambling and the risk. Is not just gambling, but I look at some of the investments that I made, because when you leave school, some of these guys are 16, 17, and they've only ever done a paper round. They're earning $20 a week on a paper round. Then they sign a deal for $20,000 a week. It's like, well, has anybody ever told me how to budget, how to look after my money? No. And then you've got probably every man and his dog who's ever known you thinking that now you should be paying for everything. You've got all these other people that are supposed to be looking out for you saying, I've got this investment idea. So it's really hard to decipher who's actually looking out for you and who's not. And I look back at some of the investments I made. I don't even want to tell you them. Like, I part own a petrol station in Sierra Leone. Yeah, you can imagine.
Or another.
I don't even know. That's how bad it is. I couldn't even tell you. And you can imagine the dividends I've received from that, can't you, over the years? So I put in $45,000 into that about 10 years, and for that I think I've got maybe one picture of the petrol station somewhere. So it's a bloody expensive picture.
Amazing.
So I just talk about stuff, like that, a little bit about the risk, being careful, making sure that if you've got a financial advisor, he's who he says he is. That I've got many stories about how friends of mine invested in all sorts of different things, and people just run off with your money at times. If they can get enough money together, you only need, you imagine getting 30 professional footballers to give you $100,000 each. Now that sounds like such a lot of money, but if you're earning $200,000-$300,000 a week, that's not much money to you. And some of them hand it out pretty easily. If you can get away to Florida with $3 million, you're living the life of Riley. And that's happened many, many a time. I know loads of financial advisors that were, supposedly certified, and they've shot off a few $1 million and you never hear from them again.
Incredible. It's amazing. So much good stuff to talk about. You've lived such a life. We haven't even brought you back to New Zealand yet, and we're let's bring you back. So the decision to come to New Zealand, you were 29. You've still got a lot of years left to give. You're still playing now. How hard was that decision, and how did it come about?
Yeah, so I got to the end of my my contract at Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace offered me a new contract, but it was like a 30 or 40% pay cut for 1 year. And that particular season, I'd had so many hamstring injuries that it felt like my body was breaking down. I wanted to move to a league that played less games. So I tried to get into the MLS through an agent. It just couldn't happen, couldn't make it work. So I was in the gym one day explaining this to a friend of mine called Nick Cahill, who played for Sydney, or ended up playing with Sydney. He used to play with Newcastle, and he said, would you play in the A-League? And I was like, probably too far for me, to be honest. And he said, look, I've got an agent, and I think the agent will be able to get you a decent deal, potentially as a marquee. And I said, well, what does that even mean? He said, the marquees get paid out of the cap. And he explained how the cap worked, and you can get a bit more money. You might get an apartment and a car, blah, blah, blah. So I said, okay, see what you can do. So the agent got in touch with me, said, I've got you a deal. You're going to go to Central Coast Mariners. And the deal was bloody good. $400,000 a year, place to stay, car. And then they showed me the ground, and the ground's like, you see the beach in the background, palm trees around the ground. I was like, oh, showed my missus. I said, it's only an hour from Sydney. Yeah, she was buzzing.
Did they have sauce bottles in the photo?
No sauce. That would have been the icing on the cake. No sauce bottles at the time, as far as I remember. That was later, the flying sauce bottles. So I was sold. I said to my missus, look, let's just go. It's only a year deal, but what's the worst that can happen? If it doesn't work out, we'll head back home, call it an adventure. I've always wanted to visit Australia anyway. So that was it. Spoke to my mum, told her I was going, rang all my friends, told them I was going. We had a party, sold up, all the bits and pieces at home, and we were off. The day I was leaving, I had a phone call from the agent. He said, the deal's off. I said, what do you mean the deal's off? I said, I've said goodbye to everybody. I said, I've got nowhere to stay. What do you mean? So he said, the Central Coast Mariners are part owned by Sheffield United, my former club. One of the directors at Central Coast had spoke to one of the directors at Sheffield and said, we're signing Paul Ifill as a marquee. What can you tell us about him? Don't sign him. He's injury prone, inconsistent, liable to go missing, blah, 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 blah. So I'm like, wow. Okay. So I said to the agent, what do I do? He said, well, look, we've got another deal on the table. It's a team called the Wellington Phoenix. I said, what league is that? I said, it's the A-League. I said, where's Wellington? It's New Zealand. It's just next door. Really similar weather, great beaches, blah, blah, blah. I was like, me being not so great at geography, looked on the map and saw that it was close and thought, it must be a similar climate. I'll be all right. So at the time, I decided no. And I said no to him. I said, look, because the deal was a lot less than, it wasn't a marquee deal. It was a lot less than the Australian one. So I needed a bit of time to get my head around that. So I said no. Went back to training with my old club, Millwall, for a little while. Then I went down to Brighton on trial, and I was talking to Norwich and a few other clubs about signing with them. And the agent got back in touch with me and upped the deal a little bit, and I still wasn't convinced. And at the time, Brighton, where I'm from, had actually offered me a contract, but it was way below even what the first Phoenix offer was. So I said to my missus, I said, should we just ring the agent, see if he can throw in somewhere to stay, up the money a little bit, and we just go. Like, again, what's the worst that can happen? If we don't like it, I can try and do well and we get ourselves off to Australia. If we really don't like it, we'll just come home. So rang the agent, he rang me back, said, yeah, done, signed. So that day I was supposed to be playing for Brighton in a pre-season friendly. So I said to the agent, right, whatever you do, don't announce this yet, because I've got to go down to Brighton and give them the news that I'm not going to sign with them. Yep, no problem. So I'm on my way into training. My phone just starts blowing up, messages ringing. So I pulled over, answered the phone. It's one of my mates. He said, are you going to New Zealand? I said, yeah. I said, how do you know? He said, mate, you're on the ticker tape on Sky Sports News. And I'm like, shit. So I'm like, what am I going to do here? Because I'd already said to Brighton I'd be in training for the day. So I thought, I need to ring the guy I've been speaking to, and his assistant coach, a guy called Dean White, nice fella to be fair. And I'm like, I just can't do it. How am I going to explain this? So I knew they started training at 9. So I sat in my car till 9:15, and then I rang his phone because I knew it would be an answer machine. And I said, hey Dean, Paul Ifill here. Sorry mate, I've just signed for a club in New Zealand. I wish you all the best for the season. And I never heard from him. And then I was catching up with a mate just 2 weeks ago that I haven't spoken to for a hell of a long time. And he said, I've just been doing a bit of work at someone's house, and he said he knows you. His name's Dean White, and he said he just wanted to ask you a question. He said he just wanted to know what happened the day that you decided you were going to New Zealand, because he can't remember what happened, but he knows it went to shit. So I had to explain the whole story to him, and he told him, and Dean came back and went, brilliant. He loved it. So it worked out in the end.
Amazing. In my notes, now I don't know about this. Seamus has put these in the notes. I'm just reading it. Apparently you got attacked by a woman as soon as you arrived in Wellington.
Yes. So I'd maybe done, it was after my first or second training session, and one of the boys, a lad called Reece Crowther, was the goalkeeper, and he'd said to me, I'll meet you in town. So we'd arranged to meet outside, I can't remember, I think it was Molly Malone's, it was called, Irish Bar in the corner. And the boys had been telling me where to go and whatnot. And I'm stood outside this Molly Malone's, and I'm obviously looking around for Reece everywhere. Can't see him. And as I turned back round to look towards the street down by Molly Malone's, I sort of feel someone hit me in the side of the head, like a proper punch. And I'm like looking around, I'm thinking, it has to be Reece. I don't know anybody else in Wellington. Maybe he's just sort of tried to grab me because he's like a big friendly bear. But I can't see him. And I'm like, what's going on? And no one's really looking. So, and then I look down the street, and there's this person sort of looking back at me, sort of pointing at me and swearing. I'm like, it must have been them. So I start running after them. And I'm shouting, hey, you, come here. And they're running, and it looks like a guy. So I catch up to him, and I grab him, turn him around, and it's a woman, and she's like 50 years old. And I'm like, what are you doing?
Not good.
And she went, yeah. She went, what? She went, I saw you looking me up and down, you pervert. And she shouted pervert so loud and now I'm sort of near Courtney Place. And you shout pervert in Courtney Place, people are going to take notice. So now I'm like, shit, now it looks like I'm in the wrong. So I sort of stand still, and I'm like, I probably need to get myself out of here. So I start walking off. She's not going to let me go now. So she starts getting after me, shouting pervert and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my God. So then I start thinking, I'm going to have to run here. So I start jogging. She picks up the pace. She's sticking with me. So I'm like, oh my God, I don't really want to be sprinting away from her, but I'm probably going to have to. So then I start taking off a bit quicker. But mate, she's got some pace. I couldn't believe it. She's sticking with me. So I'm like, I've got to get her away from me. So I turn around and I sort of grab her, sort of like by the side of a sort of jumper, and I'm like, just leave me alone. And she bites my hand. And I'm like, oh, Jesus. So then I let go, obviously, as she bites me. Then she starts kicking me and trying to hit me. I'm like, I can't win this one. And she's still shouting pervert. So then that's it. I'm pegging now. She's running down the street shouting bloody pervert. And I literally had to run back to my apartment and get in the lift and get the fuck out of there real quick. And then I told the boys at training the next day, and obviously they were in stitches, absolutely loved every minute of it. And then it got back to somehow one of the boys, because we were real friendly with Terry Serapisos, obviously, because he was the chairman. One of the boys had told Terry the story. So I didn't know that Terry knew. And then the next time we did like we'd have a team night where we'd be doing something at a awards night or something like that. Terry goes, I've got a really good story for you. And then he says, but I'm not going to tell it. I'm going to get the person involved to tell it. So he gets me up on the stage and I have to tell the whole fucking story in front of 500 people. And then every single time we went anywhere and Terry was there, he'd get me up on stage to tell this bloody story. So actually, when I think about it, Terry probably got me into public speaking before I realised it was a thing.
Amazing. What I would pay for the sort of CCTV footage of that little...
It would have been classic. It would have been classic, yeah.
How hard was it to adjust to life? You mentioned you kind of didn't really know the pace of life in New Zealand compared to what you were used to. Was it... You often hear people that have moved here from overseas say, oh, everybody's so friendly and it was this and it was that and it was great and it was all that. And aside, downtown incident aside, was it that seamless for you?
It was unbelievable. I came out on my own for the first month. My missus stayed back with my youngest, with my eldest, just to sort out a few bits and pieces. Sorting out cars and housing and whatnot. And apart from that incident, I remember ringing her about a week in, and I said, "This place is different." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, It's like the people from the Caribbean without the weather, unfortunately. But I said, they're so laid back and they're so welcoming and so friendly. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I was in the supermarket the other day and some woman started talking to me. And she said, she probably liked you. I said, she was about 85 years old and she just wanted to know what I was doing with my day. And she said, she must have recognised you. I said, no. She had no idea that I played football or anything. She didn't care. She just wanted to find out what I was up to. And then she heard my accent and then we just carried on chatting, just a normal conversation. I said, it was so weird, but I really enjoyed it. And that became a normal thing. It didn't matter who you were, where you were from. People just wanted to know your story. And I found that really fascinating. And it took a while to get used to that, because most of the time when you're back home, if people are talking to you, they want something. So it was weird for me to just have normal conversations with people that were genuinely interested in what you were doing and what you were up to. And obviously that's normal now, and you pay it forward. But I look back to when I first got here and it was magnificent. I couldn't believe what I'd walked into. It was almost too good to be true, really. And you sort of waiting for something to happen. People can't be this friendly.
Paul, I feel like most people listening to this podcast will know your Phoenix journey. You voted by the players, I think, as the greatest Phoenix player of all time. You've come out and absolutely smashed it out of the park. Did you achieve your full potential? Was that as good as things could have gone at the Phoenix for you, or was there any sort of sour taste in your mouth about any part of it?
I think that first year was the best year of my career. It was probably a few things. It was probably the timing of it, the fact that I'd gone from the Championship down to the A-League at the time, where it was a big drop off. I think it helped that we played a game a week. I didn't have to back up, Saturday, Tuesday. I felt always injured in my last season at Palace, and I played every single game for the Phoenix. So I think the timing was just right, and friendly people, a good environment. Ricky Herbert, that first year in particular, was unbelievable. He just gave me the freedom to do literally whatever I wanted. And I think after a few games and the boys realised what I could do with the ball, they were happy to kind of do the other bits that I didn't necessarily want to do. And a lot of the time I would be allowed to cheat, and people like Vince Leah and Manny Muscat would do the doggy work, and Chris Greenacre would do all the hard work. And a lot of the times I got the glory for that. And, whenever I talk about it, I always say that, my best strike partner was Greenie, because he did all the work and I got all the glory. But it was the same with a lot of the others. And I think as long as I was getting my assists, taking the pressure off the team, scoring my goals, I think they allowed me to do a little bit less defensively. So, yeah, it was my favourite season of my career. I don't know if it was my best. I think I had a better one potentially at Millwall because the level was that bit higher. I think there was one season at Millwall, got 19 assists and 11 goals. I think it was my second season. So that was probably my best. But the most fun was certainly the Phoenix. I probably didn't do quite as well the second and third years. The third year was quite good, but I never really hit the heights of that first year. I don't really know why. Maybe the players in the league had kind of worked me out a little bit more. Maybe it was an age thing. I certainly had a few more injuries sort of in those second, third and fourth seasons, obviously leading into the Achilles injury that finished me. Little bit of bitterness at the end as well, I have to say, probably with the way that my career finished. You know, you don't want to go out like that with a career-ending injury. I think you always see it a different way. You know, you decide when you finish. The fans give you a standing ovation for your however many games, and you ride off into the sunset. And it didn't quite happen. And probably for a little while, I was quite bitter there, and I didn't like to go to the games. Didn't like to look at the results. That's one of the reasons I moved away from Wellington actually and went to the Wairarapa. I couldn't go into the training ground and see the boys. You know, they were brilliant, and you know, how's things going, but you just didn't feel like you were one of them. As much as they tried to make you feel welcome, you just felt like an outsider. So I felt, I'll be really honest with you, probably the transition back to normality has been the hardest thing, and I still think I'm going through that now. I don't think I'm out the other side, and you know, you're talking 6-7 years ago. But I've found that really difficult, and that's another thing I speak about when I do go in and speak to, you know, the rugby guys, and sometimes if I do the football gigs, they need to really be prepared for what that's like, because it's tough.
Probably didn't help that some punisher at the New Zealand Herald slagging you off at your return to football at national level, believe it.
All is forgiven.
Yeah, Paul. You mentioned Ricky Herbert. Other than letting you sort of do what you wanted, how would you compare and contrast him to the other gaffers you had across your career?
Yeah, again, probably the way it ended with me and Ricky wasn't great, and we both probably said some things that we look back on and like, oh, you know, it didn't need to end like that. You know, by the end of his time, I just don't think he was coaching as much as he should have been, and I made that pretty clear to him, and he didn't like that, and probably, you know, most of the senior players probably ended up getting him out of the club, I would suggest. That's normally how it works. And we were just a little bit disillusioned with the fact that he was just not there often enough and not coaching enough. When he actually coached, he was good, but he wasn't there often enough. And it's funny how football goes, but obviously, you know, a few years later, I saw him in the National League, played against him when I was playing for Tasman, played against him when I was playing for Hawke's Bay. And we caught up afterwards, and I said, Ricky, I've got to say sorry for a few things that I said and did. And he said the same. And we had a hug and, you know, sort of buried the hatchet really. And I'm glad we did, because he was a good coach. And I think at the time, as just a player then, you don't realise all the other stuff that goes into what you're doing as a coach. And obviously, by the time I'd seen him that time around, I'd been coaching for a few years. So I knew just how difficult it must be at that next level, because I'd only ever coached at that point in the Central League, a little bit in the National League. So to understand what was going on at that level and all the pressures he was having, it kind of been easy with all of us wanting all sorts of different things. And I said that to him. I said, you know, look, I didn't appreciate how difficult it must have been for you as a coach. You had a lot going on, trying to do two jobs as well. Let's not forget, he was doing the national team and the Phoenix, and trying to keep everybody happy. It's a lot of work. So yeah, I'm glad we reconnected. We talk now. Things are fine. I hold no grudges. He was a good coach, and it was just unfortunate the way it ended. But I think it probably worked out for everybody in the end.
I've heard you speak, Paul, about never really wanting to be a coach and kind of comparing the selfish versus selfless attitude between player and coach. Is that still a thing that's in the back of your mind? Are you working your way through that? And can you kind of explain what that means?
I think the longer I go, the better or the easier it gets. I think when you play, you in the press and to your teammates, you're saying all the right things, but ultimately you want to get in the team, and it doesn't matter how you get in the team. You want to be in it, and if you've got to tread over your best mate, you're going to do it. You're probably not going to tell him you're going to do that, but if you need to kick him in training, if you need to outwork him, outthink him, you're just going to do what you've got to do. And I think that's kind of universal. And, you know, I speak to my friends now that I used to play with, and that was their attitude too. And, you know, they sometimes you have really good mates in the team, and sometimes you have guys that you don't particularly like. So, and that's just normal. So it's just, you can't help but being selfish. And then as a coach, you've got so many different personalities. You've got, especially at the level we work at, you've got people that are there for development, for further opportunities. You've got people that are there for their mental health, their mental well-being. You've got people that are there to stay fit, for the camaraderie, for the enjoyment. There's so many things you've got to take into account. You've got to look after them as individuals, and you've got to look after the collective. And each different environment might need tweaking in a different way. You know, if I'm working in the academy, I've got to look at them as individuals and look at their further opportunities. If I'm working in the women's space, it's a little bit of that, but it's also, there's some older ones that are just there because they love playing football. So how do you find a way to I suppose, impact as many as you can at one time? It's very hard. And I think what I love about coaching is the longer I do it, the more I realise I don't know anything. And there's so much to learn, and that's brilliant, you know. And in that sense, that's similar to the football, because the longer I went in my career, the longer I realised I didn't know much as a footballer, and there was so much more to learn. So that's pretty cool. I feel like I'm just probably coming to the end of my apprenticeship as a coach. I think it's about 6 or 7 years. Plenty to learn, loads that I don't know, which is a really good place to be. Feel like I've impacted a few people on the way. Would change a lot of what I've done, but I've learned some really valuable lessons along the way too.
You mentioned earlier about getting into the youth space and the women's space because you couldn't impact what happened on the pitch. Being in a household full of women, does that lend itself to a better temperament coaching in the women's game? Does that have any influence in your approach to that?
Well, I always say to my team that I don't understand what my wife wants, so what chance have I got of understanding what you want? And that always goes down pretty well. No, but you know, in all seriousness, yes, I think so. I think I have a decent understanding from I always ask for feedback. I'm a big boy, and I've got no problem with people telling me their thoughts around, you know, my coaching, my man management, the environment that I try and create. So whether it's surveys, whether it's face-to-face, you know, we have a leadership group at the Wairarapa, and I've got people in that I know are not backward in coming forward. So if they feel that something's not quite right within the environment or the coaching, they'll tell me, and that's what I expect. So I think I'm quite good at that. I like to think my man management's pretty good. You know, I think it can always be better, as can the coaching. And again, I suppose it goes back to always trying to make yourself better, whether that's reading books, listening to podcasts, looking for that feedback. And I think the feedback's probably the key one. Have you got the bollocks basically to find out where you're going wrong? And have the people got the bollocks to stand up and say, this is what I think you can do. And I think if you can allow that to come through, as difficult as that can be to hear that you're not quite where you need to be, I think that's the biggest part of growth. You know, if you can look at that and say, right, this is going to feel pretty bad for a short period of time, but it's going to lead to massive gains. And I think that's probably one of the things I've learned over the past few years. And the good thing about women is if you ask them to give you their opinion, they don't mind giving you their opinion, I tell you.
Right, he's really right.
Now, you've been appointed as a coach of a national team, the Samoan women's national team, in the most peculiar of times. So you've had no FaceTime, I'm imagining, or face-to-face time with the team. Have you popped on the documentary Last Goal Wins, which charts Thomas Rongan and the American Samoan men's team's journey through their World Cup? Have you?
No, I've seen it. I'm going to do it. A few people have told me, so you add yourself to the list. I'm definitely going to get onto that. Yeah, I mean, look, I used to play for Barbados, so I understand island nation football and the pitfalls and the dramas and the difficulties. So I think I go into it a little bit more prepared than some would be. However, you know, even up to this point, there's a lot that's going on that you think, oh, you know, we've got a lot of work to do. But there's a lot of good people pulling in the same way and on the same page. And ultimately, you know, what an opportunity to change people's lives. You know, the fact that New Zealand have already qualified, somebody has got a real chance of making it. One of the minnows is going to make it, and why can't it be us?
Well, you've been pretty heavily involved with the New Zealand National League over the last 5 and 6 years, and you're very prominent in the youth space. one of the rules they brought in this year is that each team has to have 2 under-20 players starting each match in the sort of National League. It's been a really polarising, really controversial move. We've had guest Kevin Fallon was on a few weeks ago, sort of really critiquing it. What's your stance on it? Do you think it's a good play?
Yeah, look, again, I'm biased because I've got my own academy here. So we've been doing that for the last 5 years anyway. I mean, last year we had probably 7 or 8 under 20s out of necessity because we didn't have any senior players anyway. So for me, it's a little different. I can understand others having different ideas around it, but I look and think we've got a really big opportunity now to start looking at development. If you look at some of the work that's been done at Olay, for instance, and the amount of professionals that they have produced, I think they've done really well to win the Central League, play in a certain way, a really nice style of football and producing professionals at the same time. That's kind of the holy grail. I think the Phoenix are doing pretty well now. I don't think they've done quite as well as Olay, but I think they're getting there, and the work that Paul Temple has done over the past few years is great, and I think they're really thriving now and look like a really good Central League outfit. Obviously, they're going to be going into the National League. So, if you're asking the rest of us around the country to play 2 under 20s, I don't really think that's too difficult. Are their players good enough? I think so. I think it makes it a little bit more challenging for teams to find players, and I think we've seen that down here in the Central League. There's some players that are probably being picked on. You look at the team sheet and you're like, right, for me especially, are the left back 17? Right, I know where I'm going today. I'm going to be playing on the right hand side, and I'm going to give him a tough gig. But that stands the kids in good stead, and it will help their development one way or the other. So I think if they'd have gone, bang, you need 5. I think that would have been over the top. But I think 2 is doable, and I don't see a problem going to 3 next year. I think it would be wrong to go to a completely developmental league. I don't think that's right, but I think they probably just about got it right. Obviously, there's people that are going to complain that the standard is potentially lower, but I do think over time that's going to start catching up, and you'll find, especially the teams in Auckland. I look at some of the squads. I mean, they're National League squads anyway. They'd be absolutely fine in a National League. There's some of the teams, around the country that you would definitely say different, but let's give it a bit of time. Let's not judge it just yet. I think the amount of minutes that under 20s are now playing is probably the highest ever. That's brilliant. Let's see what happens, 2 years down the line. Hopefully we can talk again and say how fruitful it's been, and that the under 20s national team are looking great, and that's led on to the under 23s doing really well at the Olympics coming up, and so many of them have filtered into the main national team, and then we know we're on the right track, and we can all celebrate that some of us were right and some of us were wrong.
It's a good answer. 10:15 on school night, Paul. We're not going to keep you for much longer, but just tell us how have you ended up in Masterton, and how long? What's your sort of 5-year plan? Your 10-year plan? Will you be there for a while?
Yeah. So really, I got offered 2 jobs when I retired. So just after I'd finished at Team Wellington, I had a phone call from a friend of mine at Wellington Olympic offering me the job. Big job, in the few years previous, they'd won the Chatham Cup and always had a very good side. But going back to what I said earlier, I just wanted to move out of Wellington, really. So the other job was Wairarapa United. Phil Kinsley rang me, and as it happened, I'd been hosting some of the lounges at the Phoenix when I was injured, and Phil happened to see me doing that one day and was really pleased with how I interacted with the kids that would come up and chat with me, and I'd spend time talking with them. Just what you do. It was nothing special really, but he said he really enjoyed the time I gave them, and that led to him looking for me to be sort of part of the club. So he brought me over to Marston, sort of sold me on the idea of what he wanted to do and get me in as player coach. And at the time I was pretty confident that I wouldn't play. Like I said, I'd had that pretty terrible go at Team Wellington, 8 games, no goals, and felt pretty awful. And decided I wasn't going to play. So I said, look, I'll coach, but I'm not going to play. He said, you'll be back in no time. He said, you'll play. And he was adamant that I'd play. But I said, look, I'll agree to coach. We'll talk about the playing later. So I took the job, finished second that first year, had a pretty good season, playing by the end of it. Second year, absolutely went to shit. I think we finished 8th out of 10. We had a decent side, and probably wasn't a good enough coach at that stage, really, to be honest, and couldn't impact the game enough to sort of cover the cracks, and got sacked, like I said, and that was the end of that. That led to me playing for him when he came back in as coach for a year, and then I decided that for a few parents, I coached a few young ladies actually at the time, about 7 or 8 of them, and their parents sort of got together and said, look, if you took the Wairarapa women's team, we'd all come and play for you. So I was like, oh, okay, let's try that. So sort of got cajoled into it, which was brilliant. I didn't realise how good it was going to be at the time, but I'm obviously still doing that job, and that's led us to the Samoa job. So got to thank them really for pushing me into that, because I don't think I'd have got into women's football without them, and I've probably not looked back, and it's been brilliant. Loved every minute of coaching them. We've had a great start to this season. Just trying to juggle the playing and the coaching at the moment. My players in the women's team are like, come on, surely you're going to retire this season. You've been saying it's your last season every year. When are you going to commit to us fully? And thankfully, most of the games are manageable, and I'm sort of rushing from one to the other. There's not too many clashes, and it's not too bad. So the club support me in that, in trying to do both. And certainly my women's players support me in trying to do both. And I'm hopeful that I can stay here for a little while longer. You never know with football where it can take you. And if I want to be a career coach, you've just got to go where the jobs come up. But certainly enjoying my time with the women at the moment, still playing for the men, and obviously got my little academy going. And, I think we punch above our weight. We're not the Phoenix, and we're not Olay, and we're never going to be, but I think we do well in a small rural region. We've sent a load of players off to university, both men and women, Division 1, Division 2 schools, some pretty cool places. And we've had the one professional in Callan. I do think I've got 2 or 3 in the academy right now that will follow in his footsteps and maybe surpass him. I'm hopeful. I won't name them because I don't want to put too much pressure on them. But if you do your homework and you look at who's playing for Wairarapa United at the moment in those under 20 positions, it probably won't be too difficult to work out.
It would be remiss of me not to touch on this, and it might take the tone down, so we'll probably have to keep you a little bit longer to bring it back up again. But I do want to talk about racism in football, because earlier on you did mention during your Millwall time you'd suffered it. Do you think when you came to the A-League, and there was a famous incident, but there was an incident in 2012, Adelaide United away, where you were subject to racial abuse from the crowd. Do you think your experiences growing up maybe calloused over the severity of what that was? And when you look back
definitely.
Recently, you look back and said you'd wish that you'd walked off at the time.
I think yes, I was hardened to it. I'd grown up with it. I lived in a place called Woodindean. My father was the only black person literally in the whole place. I was the only kid of biracial in the school, so I had to deal with all sorts. So I think you do become hardened to that, and certainly starting out at Millwall, you kind of have to. And so when I came out here, it wasn't something I hadn't heard before, but I'd not heard it in Australia or New Zealand, and I was surprised. And I think the thing that got me that day was the guy that was doing it was stood next to a kid who couldn't have looked any older than 4 or 5. And you sort of think, surely somewhere in his tiny little mind, he's got to understand that what he's doing is going to affect the next generation. So that annoyed me. And then what I always find is, and it still happens to this day, people that have never experienced racism always tell people how to deal with racism. And it's like, you don't know. You are only guessing. So, and I had a little row with a guy called Ned Zelic, who used to play, very good player for Borussia Dortmund, played in Australia, and something came up, and the goalkeeper Young was abused from Brisbane Roar, and Ned came out and said that Jamie Young should have done this and he should have done that, and I said, well, how many times have you been abused racially, Ned? Why don't we listen to Jamie? What does Jamie want? And Jamie wanted the guy to be educated. And a lot of the times that's what's needed. Ban him from the ground. Okay, you ban him from the ground. He comes back in a year later and he's doing exactly the same thing. And he's affecting the same people. Whereas if you try and educate these people, it doesn't always work. Don't get me wrong. Some people are going to be like that for life, come hell or high water. But for me at the time, and certainly in the incident with me, I wanted to be able to speak out. I wanted to be able to meet the guy. And another thing that annoyed me, the way the club handled it, they didn't let me speak. and Ricky wouldn't let me speak. And I remember falling out with him over that because I was like, well, hold on, I'm the guy that's been supposedly victimised here, and now you're not allowing me to speak on my own behalf. And I think that's why I said, in hindsight, if I'd have walked off, I'm sure people would have spoke to me. People would have asked, well, why did you walk off? Hold on a minute. Whereas because I didn't, it ended up kind of getting brushed under the carpet. The guy got banned for, I think, 2 years, but he's probably back at the ground now doing similar, and nothing changes. So I think it's more with what the fallout is, how it's dealt with. Speak to the people that are actually involved, not just always, everybody's got an idea of how it should be dealt with, but sometimes the person that's been the victim, can they find a way out of it? And maybe if I'd have been able to sit down with the guy, he might have said, look, I don't want to sit down with him, and that's fine, but why didn't they ask the question?
And then to bring it back up again, let's talk about your international football experience and captaining your country. Was that a dream growing up? As something I know you didn't have a really long international career, and there's reasons why that kind of did and didn't happen. But how was that captaining against the USA at home?
Yeah, I think as a kid growing up, I was aware of my father's roots. Born in Barbados, but that was in the back of my mind. As a kid, I wanted to play for England. I wanted to play in the Premier League, wanted to play FA Cup, wanted to play for England. That was it, and managed to play professionally. So then you're that step closer. Then you get in the first team, and maybe this is something that could happen. Could I play in the Premier League one day? Then managed to tick that off. At that point, I'd already been called up for Barbados and turned them down. There was talk when I was 20 and at Millwall that the under-21s were sort of monitoring my progress. The England under-21s, that never eventuated, and I just wasn't good enough, unfortunately. And then it was after the FA Cup final that I got a call. Would you come in and come to the World Cup qualifiers? And like I said to you earlier, I just split up with my ex-girlfriend, so I thought a couple of weeks in Barbados would probably help me feel a little better. So I went over there and had a great time. And we had 2 World Cup qualifiers against St Kitts and Nevis. We ended up losing actually and going out, which was pretty devastating. But fast forward a few years, I was called up again and played in the Caribbean Cup, scored a few goals, got my only international hat-trick against Anguilla, which still is actually Barbados's biggest ever victory. So that was pretty cool. Myself and my teammate from the FA Cup final who got Ronaldo's shirt, Mark McCammon, scored a hat-trick. So I think that's the first time 2 Bayesians have scored hat-tricks in the same game. So that was cool. And then that led to me playing again a couple of years later in a World Cup qualifier against the US. And we went over there and we had a decent side and we got absolutely whooped. I think it was 7-0. But they had Clint Dempsey, Landon Donovan, Brad Friedel. They were a good side. And then we came back to Barbados, and our captain had been sent off in the first game, and I was the vice captain at the time, and it led to me being captain at home against the USA. It was probably the best fixture we could ever get at home, and to lead my country out was magnificent. My now wife was there; she'd come over. She was my girlfriend at the time. But yeah, an amazing moment. And we played ever so well that day. We lost 1-0. And to be fair, we probably should have won. We had a few chances. The crowd got right behind us, even though we were 7-0 down. And a 1-0 loss was almost a win to them. They clapped and cheered us off the pitch. And it was quite a cool moment, actually.
It'll be the same when you finish up for one.
Hey, that's been so good, Paul. I think it's clear to me that your future is very bright in coaching, but it's also very bright as a pundit or as a public speaker, because you're one of the best guests we've had. We've done nearly 45 of these, but the career you've had, the journey you've had, and the way that you tell the stories is just incredibly captivating. This episode, I already know it's going to be incredibly well received. Thank you for being so open and so raw and letting us join you on the journey. And yeah, best of luck for the future. Next time you're in Hamilton, you look us up. We can get all those off-the-record gambling stories and go for a coffee or something. Yeah, thanks so much for giving us your time. And yeah, it's been great. Shay, last words?
No, fantastic. Look forward to meeting you in person at some stage in some club somewhere around the country. But thank you very much.
Cheers, fellas. Really enjoyed it. I've just looked at the time. I can't believe we've been talking that long. It's flown by. So obviously we had a bit of fun there. So thank you for having me. I hope it goes well, and I'll certainly be tuning in for your future podcast as well.
Awesome. Cheers, Paul.